to be a co-host, or because I
Yes.
wonder, would that still be okay? All right.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Hope Bland, Dr. Hope Bland, and I am really excited to present today. This is my first time presenting here, and I'm excited. I'm really excited about the content, the information that we'll be sharing out as well. I currently work with Toledo Public Schools, and I work with our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Department. And I thought this was a really dynamic and interesting topic to talk about. And what we're going to talk about today is reflecting on self-care and critical consciousness through an equity, diversity, and inclusion lens. This is something that I'm actually I've been doing some research on this work because it is really it's heavy work when we have to reflect on, particularly on our own implicit biases. And oftentimes we as human beings, most of us, if not all of us, strive to do better in our lives, and how we make decisions, oftentimes how we decide on a day-to-day, how we look at the world, and a lot of how we look at the world, of course, is based on our experiences. And when we are working in this kind of work that we do with early childhood and education, the work that we do to try to change lives, it takes a lot out of us as well. So this is what we're going to really explore today is we're going to still look at some of the heavy work, but we're also going to move into some of the, I'm going to interject and talk about, as we're working and looking at some of this heavy work, we're going to also talk about how we can interject some self-care. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So to understand implications of equity, diversity, and inclusion through a self-reflective lens, we're going to look at some implicit bias work. We're going to look at microaggressions, and we'll talk a little bit about team strategies and effective communication. So when you hear equity, diversity, and inclusion and self-care, what are your thoughts? What is your thought about that? I'm asking too that if anyone wants to chime in and answer any questions that I may pose, please put it in the chat box. I'm also open to anyone who is interested in or has questions throughout the session. Sometimes we can't wait to the end. If you really want to talk about something or ask a question about a slide that I'm talking about, please don't hesitate to raise your hand or put a question in the chat box. So when you hear equity, diversity, and inclusion and self-care, what is your first thought? And if there are if anyone chats, please, I'll try to pay attention to that, or our facilitator can also chime in and just let me know.
Perfect.
So typically when we think about equity, diversity, and inclusion and self-care, a lot of times we don't think about it in that regard. We don't think about working on ourselves and figuring out a way to help us to become a little less stressed about change and reflective change. It's a heavy burden, and a lot of times we walk through this space with guilt. We walk through this space with emotional and psychological discomfort because we feel that that is the way we're told, and we feel that this is the way it is supposed to feel. And oftentimes we don't take the time to realize, or we may even feel guilty, that while we're feeling a certain way about changing ourselves, and also doing some of this heavy work and understanding that it is also a reflection of who we are, in looking at how and why we too need to make make important changes to ourselves, we don't often think about how we need to also take care of ourselves through this process. So that is what we're going to talk about a little bit today as well. Next, please.
Dr. Bland, there's a comment that you see it? Yeah, that's a good one.
I did see that. It is a good one. Thank you. Belinda indicated that her thought is that sometimes it is those who are not typically included, have not experienced equity. They often feel diverse in their community and are the ones that do not consider self-care but need it the most. That's an excellent point. That's an excellent point. Belinda, did you want to comment on that a little bit more? But I appreciate you including that in this.
Well, it just seems that sometimes there's so much energy into overcoming whatever the experience is, be it diversity, equity, or inclusion, that there's like a desire or a need to be a part of a community and fitting in, that taking the time to be honest about how you're really feeling or needing to take care of yourself, you put that aside in your effort to be seen as typical with the others around you.
That is so true. I appreciate you sharing that. I've been in spaces like that, and I'm currently in a few of those spaces where that feeling is really valid. It really is. And really just feeling like you said, you're typical, you're just trying to fit in, and also you're trying to feel and do the right thing. But again, we don't often realize that it's so important that we take care of our own mental health in this process, because it is such a heavy burden, and we don't see it if we're trying to fit in. Thank you. I just want to give a little definition of equity. As we are really talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion, it's important that we do have a good understanding and definition of these terms. So equity, which is Ohio's greatest education challenge, it remains equity and education achievement for each child. The state of Ohio focuses a great deal on equity, as most states have been really focusing on equity in education over the last few years. And so it's the path to equity begins with a deep understanding of the history of discrimination and bias and how it has come to impact our current society. Next, please. So when we look at, and these are visuals that I'm sure you have seen before, just to give a visual of what equality and equity looks like. And so obviously equality is everyone will receive the same. However, equity is when we have to make sure that when individual people are receiving the same, that they have the opportunity and the resources to, that the challenges are not that great, and that there are opportunities and resources for them to achieve the same as someone else. Next, please. Defining equity in education, and this is coming directly out of our Ohio Department of Education definition, and each child has access to relevant and challenging academic experiences and educational resources necessary for success across race, gender, ethnicity, language, disability, family background, and/or income. This is directly out of the Ohio Department of Education. Next, please. Here's another visual. Visual now has added another component, and that is liberation. Can you tell us what is missing and how they arrived at liberation? And I think it's pretty clear that the barriers were removed. What I want to add to this, oh, I'm sorry, we could go back. I'm sorry. I just wanted to add one component beyond the liberation. And I'm not sure if anybody, I'm just going to ask the question, can someone look at these visuals, and at the last one, what can be added here? What else can we say about the visual, the liberation one? We see that the barriers are removed. Anything else?
You could add chairs.
I was thinking the same thing.
Okay, you're very, very close. So what we want to say, just for the sake of time, you're absolutely close to that. You can add chairs, you can actually include them in the stands. So they're standing on the outside. They're standing on the outside. So how about inclusion? Liberation and inclusion. And that's what we want to, we want to always strive to make sure that everyone is a part of all that is going on, that there is that inclusion along with equity. Thank you. So diversity has to do with more than just race and ethnicity. A lot of times when we talk about diversity, I think we're doing a lot better in training in this area, where we're really focusing on a very, very broad and comprehensive approach to diversity. It is not just about race and ethnicity, and it is about diversity of thought. It is also about gender, socioeconomic backgrounds, our sexual orientation and sexual preferences, religion preferences. So it's very, very broad. Diversity, we're all very, very diverse in who we are and how we represent. And so we want to make sure that when we think about diversity, this is just a visual that we're all part of the same puzzle. And it's just trying to figure out how we put these pieces together to ensure that we are all inclusive. Next, please. So here's a quick video I'd like to show that just gives a quick highlight of ethnicity and diversity.
What is diversity? Sometimes it's what you see. Gender, skin color, age, physical abilities. Sometimes it's what you don't see. Ethnicity, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, values, beliefs, personality. Our differences define us, allow us to make unique contributions, make life interesting. In administration and planning, we're opening up to embracing diversity, demonstrating respect, creating a welcoming environment, working together.
Okay. So I showed that because that was a video we found on the Ohio State campus website, and just to show that across the nation, people are becoming more aware and conscious of really displaying the importance of stating that they are an institution or an organization that really supports diversity, and they're doing it in many different ways. And so if we are an institution or an organization that doesn't somehow show it or demonstrate it in some way, we need to become a little bit more conscientious of how we are often talking about diversity and inclusion and equity in ways that everyone is aware that we take a stance, and we are really moving in that direction, and we're always conscious of it at all times. Inclusion. Here's a visual again of another visual that will help us understand what inclusion looks like. So the visual that is on the left-hand side kind of shows more of an integration, where yes, we're still in the same circle together. However, there are spaces where people are divided. We're still amongst each other, but we don't really engage and interact. When we look at inclusion on the right-hand side, it just shows everybody is somehow working together, engaging, and there is a conscientious and intentional approach to work together and to live amongst one another. And so it's really just that simple. When we look at the visuals, it truly helps us understand kind of how things really look in reality. Thank you. So moving on to bias. Bias is prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way that is considered to be unfair. And implicit bias is a term referring to relatively unconscious and automatic features of prejudice and judgment and social behavior. So we're really becoming much more aware, conscientious in terms of more implicit bias trainings that are happening. And so I wanted to just kind of bring this out because, again, we have to be conscious of it. No matter how much training we're getting on implicit bias and differences, we need to always stay conscientious of keeping it in the forefront of conversations. So I just wanted to give this definition as well. Next, please. Okay, so this photo. Again, I want you to put this information in your chat. When you see this photo, when we look at this individual in this picture, what are your first thoughts? Anything. What are your first thoughts? I'm going to give you all just a few minutes, and I'm going to take just a couple of responses. So some of the thoughts that are coming in, let's see. How did you end up there? How can I help? Homeless. How can I help? Hungry. Has a friend. Homeless and empathetic. Lots of how can I help this person? Has a companion. Awesome. What would you think? I'm going to change it now. What would you think if he walked into your school building? What would be your first thought? If he walked into your school building or your organization? A dad may need some help. Why is he there? Need some support. Okay, thank you. So, oh, I'm sorry, we can go back to the next one. I'm sorry. Okay. So I just want to, if we can go back to the picture of the gentleman with the dog. Yeah. And just when we get there, so I just wanted to say that many of us have preconceived notions of what we see. And we judge. We're very, very quick to judge because it's what we see. We don't know anything different than what we are aware of, what we see on a regular basis. Some people thought he looked homeless. Some people said he had a friend, he had a dog. If he walked into your school building, one person said he could be a dad, which is absolutely true. And others said, well, he needed help or support. However, this man could very well be just someone who was sitting down. He's been doing construction work. Maybe he is, somebody's dad or granddad, and he doesn't need support at all. But we're going by our visual. We're going by what we see. And based on what we see, we prejudge. And this is just a very small example of how we judge other people based on just, again, some of our own experiences. We're accustomed in general, I think, at looking at people who do not appear to dress well as someone perhaps, or if they're sitting down on the sidewalk and dressed like this man, we're assuming, we make the quick assumption that he's homeless. He has his dog on a blanket with him, and we don't know his story whatsoever. But we're very, very quick to make these assumptions. So I just want to kind of bring that out because, again, it's the consciousness that we have to be aware of. We must be aware of how we perceive and how we judge. And we hear this often, but we just don't practice it as often as we hear it. Next, please. Okay, here's another, I'm just keeping track of time. It's another video I'd like to show you in regards to implicit bias.
Implicit bias exists when we unconsciously hold attitudes towards others or associate stereotypes with them. For example, we often harbor negative stereotypes about others without consciously realizing that we do so. Implicit bias, which is also called unconscious bias or implicit social cognition, is a prejudice that is deep-seated within the brain, below the conscious level. Studies have demonstrated implicit bias against racial groups, genders, LGBTQ, and other marginalized groups. We may even be prejudiced against our own group, although we tend to favor our in-group with positive stereotypes and disfavor out-groups with negative stereotypes.
The immediate feeling you get or the immediate thoughts you have about a person, an assumption you feel, just anything you feel really stems somewhere from an experience you've had or your upbringing.
It depends on the region you're from, the country you're from, the background you grew up in. That shapes the person's unconscious bias.
I think sometimes you don't even realize it, but your own actions, maybe the way you treat others as opposed to treating others that look like you or that act like you or that are your friends.
Implicit bias often runs counter to people's conscious, expressed beliefs. Few physicians espouse racially discriminatory views, and yet doctors tend to recommend less pain medication for black patients than for white patients with the identical injury. In other words, people can be explicitly unbiased, yet implicitly biased, according to psychologist Daniel Kelly and colleagues.
One of my closest friends since high school, we've worked on a lot of projects together, we've been in a lot of classes together. Sometimes we'd be working together in a group project, for example, and she would say stuff like, "Oh, you're good at math, you're good at science, here, you can take this part of the project or something." I don't hold it against her or anything, and she doesn't mean any harm by it, but obviously there's that implicit sort of bias or stereotype that Asians are better at math and science.
Implicit bias has been found in a large array of studies using various tests, but much of the evidence for the phenomenon comes from Harvard University's Project Implicit website, home of the Implicit Association Test, or the IAT. Literally millions of people have visited this site and taken various tests that ask them to respond rapidly to questions that require them to associate blacks or whites, males or females, or young or old, etc., with positive or negative words.
Most of the implicit biases that I've run into are probably positive ones, things that come with being a white male and having height and having a good voice and things like that.
Professor Nosek and colleagues tested more than 700,000 subjects and found that more than 70% of white subjects more easily associated white faces with positive words and black faces with negative words, concluding that this was evidence of implicit racial bias. In fact, additional evidence indicates that measures of implicit bias better predict people's conduct than measures of explicit bias.
I think that if you are anyone, to be blunt, that it's not a white male, you potentially feel that implicit bias. Maybe you're just looking for someone that is like you because you like you, and so you want to be around more people like you. But what's really rooted under that is that you potentially don't think that someone else is as smart or as capable, and that is coming from a place of implicit bias.
Now here's some good news. Various scientists have criticized the IAT. They point out, for example, that individuals who take the test on different dates often score substantially differently. Even IAT supporters admit that implicit bias, at least as demonstrated by the test, is widespread but relatively minor and has only a small impact upon people's real-world actions. In other words, the results of the test are not strong enough to predict particular behaviors by individual people. However, let's not get too comfortable. Even if the IAT cannot predict the future conduct of any one individual on a given occasion, it still indicates how groups of people will act on average, and that is worrisome. For example, few people openly advocate for discrimination in hiring, But white applicants receive 50% more responses from potential employers than do black applicants with the same resume. Likewise, college professors are substantially more likely to answer student emails if the students' names indicate that they are probably white than if the names sound like they belong to black students. And in one study, online course instructors were 94% more likely to respond to discussion posts by white male students than by other students.
There are a lot of opportunities to promote people within the workplace. It doesn't happen because of different biases. People assume, a woman is of a certain age or they're married and you think, oh, she's going to want to have kids, so we're not going to give her this really tough, big project.
When I graduated from West Point in 2009, I went to my first organization, the first unit assignment. I was the only Latino officer in a group of about 100 other officers. Yeah, I think there was a lot of hesitation in really following my lead as a leader for the organization. I think it hindered in some way the ability for us to build cohesive trust within our organization and really have that going into a combat environment.
Because implicit bias operates at a mostly unconscious level, it is difficult for individuals to overcome. No existing training regime has proven particularly effective at debiasing implicit bias. But fortunately, some research shows that stereotypes can be unlearned and that safeguards can be put in place to minimize their impact. For example, women used to make up only a relatively small percentage of the musicians in orchestras. But when orchestras began holding blind auditions, where the applicants played behind a curtain and their genders were unknown to the judges, the percentage of women chosen to play in symphony orchestras doubled. Perhaps we can put a dent in implicit bias after all.
These biases are sometimes so deep-rooted within us or within our culture that we don't even realize that they are biases.
We could have a mutually, beneficial conversation and really benefit from learning from each other and really understand that we're all not that different.
Listen, really absorb the experiences of those around you, especially those who come from backgrounds that are unlike yours.
Learn something new about a person, and then that will kind of help shift that bias, because now you've actually asked that person, or now you get to know that person.
There's so many opportunities to engage with others, to say, I don't want to do this again. Can you help me not do that? And people are willing to have those conversations.
Hope, you're on mute.
Thank you. I think I said a mouthful already. Thank you. What I wanted to say quickly was about that particular video. It's really important. I know it's just a little lengthy, but it's so important because we really have to hone in on our implicit bias, which is so deeply rooted in our subconscious minds. We just don't know oftentimes. We're just not aware of sometimes how we behave. And when it's brought to our attention, we have to do really good at listening, like they mentioned. We have to do very good at, or do a better job at stepping back, being reflective, and not being offensive. And so that takes a lot of work. It's a lot of heavy work. And that's why it's going to be important when we talk a little bit about, or we talk more about self-care, why it's so important. So again, if we could move to the next slide, but I also just want to quickly say that there is a Harvard implicit bias test. I encourage anyone who is really doing self-work, and that I really encourage everyone. But when you're doing self-work and you're doing work with other people, it's really important that you understand what those biases are about yourself. And so I encourage you to take the implicit bias. It's on the Harvard, Harvard website. And I've taken it several times. I encourage you to take it as often as you feel it necessary. There are several categories that you can look at that doesn't necessarily relate to race, but there's several categories of biases that you can look at if you want to spend some time there. Thank you. So the next one This is just a little fun. You can just put this in the chat. I'm going to ask you some questions about your preferences. This is called this or that. Next, please. Okay, what is your preference in terms of the Apple phone or the Android? Got a lot of people chatting, mostly Apple, some Android. All right, the next one, Pepsi or Coca-Cola? Thanks everyone for chatting or engaging. Next one, please. All right, I'm getting a little old. Luke Bryan or Jason? Is it Aldine? I'm sorry. You know that. Luke or Jason? Both. Okay. Next. Ohio State or Michigan? OSU or Michigan? Wow, it's almost tied. Next. All right. Who do we have here? Cardi B or Nicki Minaj? Neither. Okay, next please. Marvel Comics or DC? Marvel or DC? Awesome. Next. Sam Smith or Ed Sheeran? Now I'm sure some of you may not know who these people are, but you can base it on the visual. Sam Smith or Ed? Okay, next please. All right, I thought I'd put in a couple of our older people just in case so that we can say that, so that some of us like my age can identify with. Paul McCartney or Elton John? Awesome. And the next one, please. Okay, so we have Facebook or Instagram. Okay, so the reason why I did this, can anybody guess? And I'll go ahead and just, again, we were looking at preferences. Real simple, right? We're really quick. Yes, someone just said biases, thank you. Because when we always start out with preferences, and these were just real simple preferences. These were just, you know, something real easy because oftentimes from day to day, our preferences are real easy. We don't think about it. We just know that we look at something or we taste something or we're in the environment where we enjoy something or don't enjoy it, we're quickly to say that's my preference or that's not my preference. But preferences also lead to biases. And so this was just a little exercise because it's just something we don't think about. We just, you know, we like something or we don't like it and we make a choice. However, when it comes to thinking about biases, that goes a lot deeper. And again, it's not within our subconscious. It's easy to make to take our preferences and then they begin to turn into biases. These are biases. One has a bias over another. But when it comes to human beings and it comes to how we begin to treat other people, how we begin to exclude, that can happen just as easily as well, and we're not conscious of it. And so I wanted to use this exercise because I wanted to show just how easy it is for us to take something quite simple and say, I have a preference for that, and not think about it. And yet that same way of behavior often happens too when we are working with people. And it's just that simple as well. And we begin to, we have preferences and we begin to exclude because it's maybe something that they said, maybe a way they look, or some experiences that we've had, that we began to show preferences and biases towards individuals. And so we need to be really conscious again in how we perceive the way that we look at the world around us. Okay, next, please. So I just kind of talked about this. If we could go to the next slide. And again, and I just shared about this as well. Next, please. So self-care while working on, I use racial equity right now because of the climate that we're in, but really self-care while just working on equity. I wanted to focus just a little bit on the racial equity because I think each and every one of us are impacted by our current climate. So we want to be courteous about the space that we're in. We want to stay engaged, and we don't let your heart or your mind check out. So when you're uncomfortable, it's really important that we accept what it feels like to be uncomfortable. Experience that discomfort and agree to experience discomfort in order to deal with issues of race in an honest way. If we check out too soon, then we don't really deal with it and we don't accept the honesty of what it feels like to have to reflect on ourselves and to have to be uncomfortable with how we feel about things. And speak your truth. Be honest about your thoughts and your feelings and your opinions and say them in a way that is true for you. So if you are in a space where you don't feel that you can speak out, you need to get to a point to where it's okay to be okay with that, even when the people around you are not necessarily receiving of your information or your thoughts. And I'm speaking more in terms of ways that are not harmful to other people, ways that allows you to think in a way of inclusion and thinking in a way of equity and moving your progressing yourself and moving from one space within yourself to the next. Expect and accept non-closure. Expect that you may not reach closure in your understanding about race and race relationships because there is no such thing as a quick fix. As much as it's taken for us to be in a place of discomfort or a place of where there is oppression in our world, it's going to take a lot of time to deconstruct and move in an area, a space in our world where we are no longer talking about inclusion and no longer talking about inequities. It takes time, and it takes often a lifetime. Next, please. And here's a quote I think is important. Vulnerability is not weakness, and the uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure we face every day are not optimal. Our only choice is a question of engagement, and our willingness to own and engage with our vulnerability determines the depth of our courage and the clarity of our purpose. The level to which we protect ourselves from being vulnerable is a measure of our fear and disconnection. And I wanted to read that and for you to feel that. This is really, it's more true than ever. It's about taking care of ourselves, and it's okay to be vulnerable. It is not a sign of weakness. Next, please. It's only when we can learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable is when the discomfort is when that discomfort is the awareness of our own biases. It's really important that you cannot really, and I'm saying this with a little being careful of how I say it, but I do feel, and this is based on some of my own experiences, I'm not saying that everyone would feel this way, but I think after having conversation about discomfort, many people feel that when they are discomfort, when there is that level of discomfort, that they are beginning to arrive in a different place and that they are beginning to recognize change and recognize that it is okay to be there, no matter how uncomfortable, but their sense of awareness is beginning, because people may question, well, how do I know I've changed? And oftentimes it's because you're discomfortable. there's a sense of discomfort there. You're finally recognizing that you're not happy with the way you have seen things, and you're beginning to look at it differently. And there is that discomfort there because it's hard. It's a burden. It's hard work, and it's daily work. It's daily work for all of us. It's self-reflection, and it's helping us to. It really does help you to change. Discomfort helps you to change. But if you begin to question whether or not you're changing, ask yourself how comfortable or uncomfortable you are. And always remember that it takes time and focus effort to learn how to be intentional in our efforts as change agents. So it's really important through self-care that you not rush yourself and that you do not feel that you have to feel guilty or you have to feel a certain way. It is a life-changing process. Next, please. It is important to hear that you are not excluded from the deficit narrative. And what that means is that we are all part of the problem. So as we're speaking about these, talking about self-reflection, but as we're talking about how it is important for everyone to change, that also includes you. Oftentimes when we speak about data or we talk about implicit bias or we talk about it from a third person, I guess, people kind of check out and think, oh, that's my neighbor. Sometimes it's not. And oftentimes it is us. We all have implicit bias. We each own a piece of the problem, and therefore we are each responsible for creating a solution that equitably impacts everyone, so that we can live in a global space together. Next, please. Thank you. Next video.
Now, teaching about tolerance to the very youngest children in school. The lessons are certainly not new, but in some communities, they're taking on a new urgency and relevance in the wake of deep racial divides, social tensions, and violence around the country. Special correspondent Kat Wise visits a pair of noteworthy programs in California. It's for our weekly series, Making the Grade.
We're going to take out the mirror now, we're going to look at ourselves, and we're going to make our own face.
In this Alameda, California preschool, a box of crayons with a multitude of colors is helping little kids learn big lessons.
So put your hand and decide what you think is the best suited for you.
Teacher Tiffany Battle asks the children to look carefully at their own skin color and their classmates' skin colors.
Again, let's put our hands in.
To notice differences and similarities.
I'm black and white.
The art project is just one of many ways children are introduced to an anti-bias curriculum here at the Child Unique Montessori School, a private tuition-funded program.
Okay, so go ahead and color your skin in.
Cindy Acker is the school's founder and principal.
Within any color of someone's skin, there are many, many different colors, and so we want them to appreciate the diversity within their own individuality. And then we want them to be able to see and question other children's differences.
If you add this lighter color to it, what do you think is going to happen?
It's going to be lighter.
We're different on the outside, but inside we have lungs, we have a heart, we have a mind, and that's the same.
Talking about racial differences is not new at the school. Acker started the program more than 30 years ago, and it was among the first of its kind in the country to focus on diversity and inclusion at such an early age. But she says the curriculum seems more important than ever.
To me, the things that are going on in the world today give us an indication that we need a major shift in how we perceive people, how we honor people, how we treat people. And because I'm a firm believer that it begins at the preschool level, I think that that's where we need to start. Sophie, are you going to make it out?
Acker points to racial divides witnessed in recent events like the violent neo-Nazi protests in Charlottesville, Virginia, the police shootings of black men, and the debate over NFL players taking a knee to protest racism.
What we have seen is a resurfacing or a surfacing of what we thought was absent, but sits within the psyche of some individuals.
One thing I've been seeing is Louise Derman Sparks has written several books about teaching anti-bias to preschoolers.
The truth is that young children notice differences very early. By the age of 3 and 4, they're asking questions, they're beginning to develop and to absorb the stereotypes and misinformation, discomforts. Don't like to call it prejudices, it's kind of like pre-prejudice. So the myth that they aren't noticing, the idea of being colorblind, actually harms kids.
Derman Sparks says preschool teachers who talk about the differences and similarities among their students create an environment where misinformation and fears can be addressed.
For instance, if you have dolls of different types and a child refuses to play with a doll that's got dark skin, teacher can say, how come you don't want to play with so-and-so? And depending on what the child says, you can then decide to help overcome whatever the discomfort is.
We are all different. That's exactly the atmosphere teacher Francesca Conterno hopes to create for her students at a public preschool.
Look at this boy. What's different about his eyes compared to his? His eyes are blue. Yes. His eyes are blue. And I see Mariana's got blue eyes. And you made blue eyes in your picture up there. What about Kim? What color are Kim's eyes?
Black.
Yeah, they're definitely black.
Conterno teaches 3- and 4-year-olds in the Hayward Unified District. Someone might hear about a program like this and think, gosh, race and racism or highlighting differences, that's not something that should be done in a classroom, especially a preschool classroom. How would you respond?
I would say, why not? It's the perfect setting. It is absolutely the perfect setting. We have families in the classroom. It's a safe place. People develop relationships. Perfect setup for honest conversations.
Conterno does not ask children directly about fears or misconceptions about race. Instead, she believes materials that highlight equality can provide a powerful message in the classroom. Derman Sparks agrees.
If most of the books show white people and very few show people of color, then that's a message for the teachers are white, or if the teacher's white, but the assistants are always people of color. These are all messages to kids about who matters, who's visible, who's not, who has power.
Conterno sees the sometimes uncomfortable questions children do ask about race and gender as teachable moments.
Too many times you see in classrooms, teachers will respond to that by play nice, or we're all friends in here, when it's a perfect opportunity to go a little bit deeper.
So you see how we have one shade of brown, we have even a lighter shade here, right? We have all of these different colors. So I have a feeling there's probably more than 2, right? How was your day? You want to do this one?
Back at the Child Unique Montessori School, parent Shawnee Keck says she chose the program for her 3 children because of its strong focus on equity and social justice. But she says her husband did have questions about the anti-bias curriculum.
I have a tall white husband, and he was absolutely concerned, especially for our son who was in the elementary school, saying, does this make him feel worse? Does this make him feel like he might be, somebody that should be feeling bad about his whiteness? And I don't think so. I don't think it's not pie, just because you have a piece doesn't mean somebody else doesn't get a piece.
They said you can mix colors. Did you like that?
Amitra Mamdui also chose the school for its focus on diversity, but she points out that for 2-, 3-, and 4-year-olds, the conversation is kept very simple.
Of course, you don't start talking about the new Jim Crow or prison industrial complex. You're not starting that at a young age, but just to recognize that, okay, different colors exist because of melanin, and this is natural, and we're all different, but we're also similar. We bleed, we cry, we love.
Light a candle for peace, light a candle for love.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Kat Wise in Alameda County, California.
Okay. For the sake of time, that's amazing. It's an amazing video, I thought, to really help, particularly again in the climate that we're in. And I don't think this climate's going to change. I think that we're moving progressively into a new climate to where we are really conscious of how we treat one another, period. And so, and young people and young children, as this video has shown, they're very curious. They're very innocent as well, but it starts there. It starts at home, and then it starts when they come into our preschool settings, and they want to know, who is Johnny? Why is Johnny different than I am? I love Johnny anyway, and how do we then nurture that? That is everyone's responsibility at home and in school and within our community. Moving next, because of the sake of time, and I just have some more, this information is it's so hard to put it all, compact it all into 1 hour. Quickly, I just want to encourage everyone to look at the Yale, there's an implicit bias Yale study. And this study, just very quickly, just again, looking at bias and how bias plays a part in preschool. This particular study looked at how particularly Black boys are tracked based on behavior. And so I encourage you to take a look at this study. It's called the Implicit Bias Yale study. Dr. Walter Gilliam is the he is the professor who conducted this study, and it just has a lot more detailed information about implicit bias and race. Really good study. So I encourage you to look at that. Next, please. And I apologize for having to rush. The Ohio State University Current Institute, I get a lot of my research from there. Talks about the importance of, it talks about the U.S. Department of Justice, that because there's such a problem in our society with implicit bias and racism, that there had to be a message that was sent out. Basically, that states that we obviously cannot discriminate, but that this message had to be very clear within our school systems, within our educational systems and our justice systems, that it is, and this came out in 2014. So there has been a lot more about how we need to, as a nation, address racism and discrimination in our country. Next, please. Just again, looking at race and discipline, 48% of preschool children were suspended more than once. While Black preschool children only comprise 19% of the preschool population. This was in 2015, just looking at some data while we're looking at preschool and how our biases have such a huge impact even on children as young as preschool. Next, please. On the talk, this is a very, very quick video. Can we move to just to show what the talk is? Thank you.
Who said that? The lady at the store.
That is not a compliment.
It's an ugly, nasty word, and you are going to hear it. Nothing I can do about that. But you are not going to let that word hurt you.
Yeah, Johnny. I guess I stopped you.
Now, when you get pulled over,
I'm a good driver.
Okay,
don't worry.
This is not about you getting a ticket. This is about you not coming home.
I'm going to be okay. Right?
Okay. You are not pretty for a Black girl. You are beautiful, period. Okay? Don't ever forget that.
Very quickly, I just wanted to say, these are conversations that are had in many of our American homes about different talks. One of the talks is about race and racism, particularly among African-American families. And it is being talked about even more today with the current climate. And so I wanted to share this with you because of just how true it really is. Lastly, I just want to move on. Let's see, Microaggressions really are just, I just want to quickly say that microaggressions are more about, they come across as compliments, but again, these are some things that all of us experience microaggressions. However, oftentimes they are more experienced by underrepresented and marginalized groups of people. And so they can come across, again, as compliments, but can be very hurtful and harmful. Next, please. Just give a few examples of what they look like. One could be where someone is making comment about a person's natural hair. They want to touch the texture of it. Those they may not necessarily appear as microaggression, but there's some preconceived thoughts oftentimes behind that gesture. Making a female, for example, mistaking a female physician for a nurse. So it's not always about race at all. It can definitely be about gender and just how we're conditioned and socialized within our own society, and we just make these assumptions based on our conditioning. Next, please. And again, just think before you speak. Be conscious of, often be conscious before, and think about it in a way, would you want someone to do that with you? Would you want someone touching your hair? Would you want someone commenting constantly about how you look? And people oftentimes are curious, but again, let's think about it first. It's okay to ask the question, but think about how you ask it. And just be reflective. If we could go to the next slide, please. We're almost there. Self-awareness is the ability to take on honest look at your life without any attachment to it and being right or wrong or good or bad. So again, this is more of the self-care, and I really wanted to focus on this as we end. Before there can be change, there must be self-awareness. Name your biases and reflect on how they affect your power, your privilege, and your behavior. You must first identify your own biases and assumptions relating to social problems that you identify. So if we're going out and we're really trying to be change agents, and particularly those of us who are looking at equity, diversity, and inclusion in the work that we do, we really have to hone in on what our own biases are, self-reflect, because oftentimes we can project those own biases. Even though we're trying to do the work, we can project those biases onto others, as well as the behavior or the work that we're doing, and we become counterproductive. You must first identify your own bias. Oh, I'm sorry, I just said that. Otherwise, there can be no real change if we really can't work on ourselves. If we choose not to work on ourselves, how can we truly change and help others? This doesn't mean that we should feel guilty about the power and the privilege that we hold, nor is it about feeling sorry for ourselves or pitying ourselves. This is not about us, but it is about taking care of us. But at the end of the day, it is about changing the world. Self-awareness is an opportunity to recognize and call out experiences that we've internalized, as well as understand when we move in and out of positions of power. We must really be conscientious of what our privileges look like, the power that we hold, and how we manifest that power. Centered leadership and self-care. As we lead with equity as a goal without a consistent schedule of self-care, you will only find yourself frustrated and burnt out. It is heavy work, everyone. It is heavy work. And if you don't feel the burden, you may have to question whether or not you're truly doing the self-reflective work. Be sure to schedule a time for self-care in your schedule and honor that time. It should be non-negotiable. The time is very sacred. And you should know that the work that you put into your self-care ensures that you can be there for your community in the long term. How can you encourage others to believe in their self-care if you consistently neglect your own? So when you say you're going to take care of yourself, do so. Next slide, please. I think this is like towards the end. And what that looks like is mindfulness, practice meditation for calming and relaxation. The work of self-reflection and transformation brings some emotional and psychological burden. Self-reflection, it means transparency and introspective. Be true and honest to yourself. It is personal and it comes with growing pains with results of awareness and emotional growth. Acknowledge the growth, acknowledge the change, and be okay with being uncomfortable with both of them. And then celebrate all personal growth and change as it relates to humanness. It's very important that when you are uncomfortable, you can even celebrate that. You've reached a milestone. And it is okay to celebrate that, hey, I'm uncomfortable. I'm not real happy with myself. But then you keep moving on. It's work that we do consistently all the time in reflecting on change. And it's no different than once we began to work on ourselves, it comes as second nature in just about everything we do in relationships with our families and relationships with people who are outside of our families. And that's really all that it is. Okay, thank you so very much. Any questions? Oh, lastly, deconstruct, reconstruct, construct. We're deconstructing, which means we're tearing down what is the old. It's time to tear it down. Then we have a vision in the reconstruct. Let's have a visual, let's have a collective visual of what we want it to look like. And then we begin to construct. Let's build it from the scratch, from the bottom up, piece by piece together.
We have a comment and a question, Dr. Bland. The comment from Mallory is, have people watched The American Son on Netflix? It's really eye-opening.
Okay, I have not.
And the question is, have you ever heard about the Napping Project? And does that have something to do with self-care?
I have heard of the Napping Project. I've not explored it yet. And so I cannot answer that question if it actually, how much it may have to do with self-care. But I am writing this down because I'd like to look into it. Thank you. Thank you. Anything else? Any other questions? And what was it was called The American Son?
Yes.
I see that in the, okay, awesome. I'm going to look into that. Thank you. All right, everyone, thank you so very much. I appreciate your comments. I appreciate your engagement. And I know it's time to move on to the next session. So thank you again. I really appreciate being here.
Thank you, Dr. Bland.